Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we bring you 5 wilderness horror stories. Real accounts of voices in the fog trails that vanish and towns that rewrite the rules of time. Out here the trees remember, the laughter doesn't fade. And sometimes, you're not the one walking out. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Fork in the White River Trail. There's a kind of silence you can't buy in the city, not with money, not with meditation apps, not even with noise-canceling headphones. I had burned through all 3 trying to find it. After 15 years in Chicago, juggling tech clients' deadlines and downtown chaos, something in me just cracked. I started waking up with this low buzzing dread like a power line was humming through my chest. My hands would twitch at red lights, waiting for the signal to change like I was still refreshing email. My therapist called it urban burnout. I called it being swallowed whole. That's how I found myself staring at a topo map of Arkansas's Ozark Highlands at 2 a.m. with a beer in one hand, and my old fishing rod leaned against the wall like it had been waiting for me to remember who I was. My buddy Cole, an old army friend, turned off-grid wanderer, had once told me about a hidden bend in the White River, up past a faded trailhead nobody used anymore. "You want quiet," he'd said, half laughing through the phone. "This place will make you forget your own name. No tourists, no cell towers, just water trees, and maybe God." It sounded like exactly what I needed. Not just a break, a reset. So I cleared my calendar, threw my gear into the back of my Tacoma, and pointed south. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my sister. It wasn't about disappearing, not really. It was about remembering what it felt like not to be watched, texted, scheduled. Just me in the woods like it used to be. That morning crossing into Arkansas, the roads narrowed and the trees leaned in close. The air smelled like moss and wet stone. And somewhere inside me, that buzzing started to fade. By the time I pulled into the gravel turnout Cole had marked on the screenshot he texted me a year ago, the sun was high enough to burn the dew off the hood. No signs, no markers. Just a rusted gate, half swallowed by kudzu, and a barely there impression in the brush like a deer trail someone forgot to erase. It looked exactly like the kind of place Cole would call a secret worth keeping. I cut the engine and stepped out into a silence so complete it felt like walking into a cathedral. My boots crunched dry leaves as I did a final gear check rod tackle box, 2 water bottle sandwiches, flashlight, compass, my Glock 19 in its chest holster, and the kind of quiet you only get when no one knows where you are. The trail dipped almost immediately, sloping into a canopy of oaks and hickories. Sunlight filtered through in soft golden shafts, and for the first half hour, I just walked, no music, no thoughts, just the rhythm of my breath and the pulse of the trail beneath my feet. Every step felt like peeling off a layer of noise I didn't know I'd been carrying. The world up there, the one with alarms and inboxes and always being reachable, just faded. Down here, I didn't have to answer to anything. About 2 miles in the trail got thinner, swallowed a little more by brambles and fallen limbs. It wasn't overgrown exactly, just neglected. The kind of path only animals or old ghosts still remembered. My compass still pointed west, just like Cole said, and I pressed on with the kind of quiet confidence you only get when you're doing something for yourself, not for show. Then I came to the bend. It wasn't supposed to be there. Cole had said clearly, follow the trail, no forks, no choices. Just stay the course. But here it was, a split. 2 narrow paths veering off like a wishbone. One curved left along the ridge, wide and gentle. The other dropped hard and fast into shadow, veering toward the sound of moving water. I stood there, sweat starting to bead the silence, suddenly sharper like it was waiting. Something in me said left was safer, but my gut, that old deep animal instinct, pulled hard toward the right. Toward the creek, toward the unknown. I took the right path. Almost immediately, the ground changed under my boots. The dirt was darker, looser, broken by exposed roots that twisted like veins. The air turned cooler, damper, as if the sunlight had agreed not to follow me past the bend. Shrubs crowded closer. Young saplings leaned in with that wild urgency that happens when nature thinks it's been left alone too long. The sound of water grew louder, fast, steady, alive, but it didn't calm me the way I expected. It felt like a lure, like something wanted me to keep going. The trail narrowed to little more than a deer run, barely visible between clusters of mountain laurel and low-hanging cedar. Twice I had to duck beneath deadfall. Once I stepped over the carcass of a raccoon ribs, picked clean and curled like teeth. The wind had stilled completely now. No birds, no insects. Just the thump of my boots and the sound of water that never got closer. Then the silence began to deepen. Not just an absence of sound, but a weight, a pressure. I stopped mid-step and realized I could hear my own heartbeat sharp in my ears. I glanced back up the path. Nothing. No movement. No breeze in the trees. But just as I started to turn again, I caught it motion. Barely a flicker. A pale shape slipping behind a thick oak, maybe 30 yards up the ridge, like someone had been watching and ducked away just as I looked. I froze. It didn't make sense. I hadn't seen another soul all day, and no one in their right mind would have come down this path, not without a machete. "Hey," I called, voice cracking a bit more than I liked. "You all right up there?" No answer. No movement. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. My fingers hovered near my holster. Not drawn, just aware. Maybe it was nothing. A trick of the light. A deer. Hell, maybe my city nerves weren't as gone as I thought. But as I turned and kept walking, the trail seemed to darken just slightly, like the trees had shifted behind me. Like the forest knew something I didn't, and wasn't done showing it yet. Another quarter-mile in the trail dropped steeply and then vanished altogether, swallowed by wet ferns and shifting rock. I slid the last few feet down a muddy slope and found myself in a narrow ravine, the banks rising steep and sharp on either side. The creek was finally there, though not as wide or clean as I imagined. It moved like something half asleep water, slicking over dark stones, slow and reluctant. The light barely reached the bottom. Everything was damp, smelled of wet leaves, iron, and rot. That's when I saw it. Off to the right, tucked beneath a drooping sycamore, was a low-slung tarp strung between two trunks, mildew-stained, sagging with moisture. Beneath it, a pile of firewood, a rusted metal pot, and what looked like a faded army sleeping bag curled into itself. Beside it, a beat-up Coleman cooler lay on its side lid, half open like a gaping mouth. Something about it made my stomach clench. This wasn't some weekend campsite. This was a nest. There were clothes, too threadbare, twisted into the underbrush. A pair of boots' toes pointing in opposite directions like they'd been kicked off mid-run. And carved into the tree just above the tarp were deep horizontal gouges. 5 parallel slashes dug through bark and into raw wood. They were too wide, too far apart for any tool I recognized. Something had clawed this. Deliberately. I knelt slowly, my boots squishing in the mud, and reached for the cooler. A spider darted out from under the lid. As I lifted it empty, save for a clump of fur I couldn't identify, and something wet that had dried into a rust-colored smear along the bottom. Then I heard it. A soft crunch. Off to my left, Deliberate, slow, not a branch snapping, not a squirrel. A footstep. I didn't move, barely breathe. Another step closer this time, just beyond the tangle of brush. Then nothing. The silence stretched long and cold. I slid my hand down toward my Glock fingers, curling around the grip, heart hammering so loud, I swore it would give me away. I didn't know what I was listening for, but I knew it wasn't something I wanted to meet. And it knew I was there. I eased back a step, then another, the mud sucking at my boots like it didn't want to let go. My throat felt tight like I hadn't swallowed in minutes. I didn't want to call out again, not this time. Whatever was out there knew I was here. It had made itself heard. Now it was waiting to see what I'd do. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone. Not for help, I knew there'd be no signal but to use the screen like a mirror. I angled it slowly, carefully over my shoulder, and there it was. Maybe 30 feet back, partially hidden behind a leaning tree, was a figure. Pale, thin, human-looking, but off. Long tangled hair, a tattered coat hanging off narrow shoulders. I couldn't make out the face, it was tilted, obscured by shadow, but I could feel it. Staring. She wasn't approaching, just keeping pace with me, staying in the cover, watching like a predator that wasn't hungry yet. I stuffed the phone back in my pocket and turned, trying to move quickly without showing panic. I kept my steps steady, not running, but faster than before. Muscles tight, every nerve lit. I could hear the sound of something moving behind me, now brush parting, twigs cracking under weight, not following directly, flanking, mirroring. The forest was closing in around me, branches tugging at my sleeves, shadows flickering at the edge of vision. I reached the place where the trail had vanished, where I'd slid down into the ravine and scrambled up the muddy slope, clawing at roots and stones. My boots slipped knees, scraping bark. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder, erratic, unsteady, but intentional. At the top, I spun, heart hammering, yanked the Glock from its holster, and fired twice into the air. The sound cracked through the trees like a thunderclap. Silence. Then retreat. I heard the footsteps reverse rapid and light crashing back into the undergrowth like an animal flushed from cover. I caught one last glimpse as she fled, hair flying, coat flaring, arms pumping like something wild. She didn't run like someone afraid. She ran like something startled out of its game. And I realized that's what I'd been this whole time. Not a visitor, not a hiker, a toy. I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. The climb out of the ravine was brutal, every step a battle against mud-tangled roots, and the shaking in my legs. My lungs burned. My back ached. But I pushed, forced myself to move, like something was still behind me, just out of reach. The forest had gone quiet again, but not in a peaceful way. It was a silence that listened like the trees were holding their breath, waiting to see if I'd make it out or not. At the fork, I barely slowed. The left path, the one I should have taken, looked somehow different now. Wider, clearer, as if it had always been the only trail here. My mind twisted around that, because I remembered the fork. I remembered choosing. But now, it was like the right-hand path was gone, swallowed by moss and thorns. Vanished like it had never existed. The sun was lower than it should have been. I had no idea how long I'd been down there. Time had bent. My watch had stopped. Each switchback I passed on the climb out was a small victory, a breath closer to the truck. But the feeling didn't fade. That thick, sticky knowing that I was still being watched, still being followed. I didn't dare stop. Not until the trees began to thin and I saw that sliver of gravel up ahead, like salvation carved into the earth. When I reached the truck, I didn't toss my gear in, I hurled it. Slammed the door, locked everything, and sat there, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. My reflection in the windshield looked pale, drawn, unfamiliar. Only after I started the engine did I finally breathe deep. And even then, it didn't feel like I'd escaped. It felt like I'd been let go. Story 2. The Man in the Hollow. When my grandfather died, I inherited his old hiking journal. It was leather-bound, worn, soft at the edges, filled with looping cursive entries about trails he'd walked through the Black Hills of South Dakota. Most pages were practical notes, elevation changes, water sources, weather patterns, but one entry stood out. Dated 1971, it described a place he only called the Hollow. No coordinates, no map sketch. Just a line that said, "Found the Hollow again." Still quiet, still watching. I didn't think much of it until the week after his funeral, when I came across a faded photo tucked into the back of the journal. It showed him standing beside what looked like a tall birch tree carved into the rough shape of a man. Not a statue exactly, but close. Limbs where they should be. A long face. Smooth bark that looked almost like skin in the right light. It unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. 2 months later, I took time off work, packed a backpack with my tent, his journal, and a bag of pipe tobacco he used to smoke when he thought no one was watching. I wasn't planning some spiritual journey. I just wanted to see what he saw. Maybe scatter his ashes someplace quiet. The trail into the Black Hills was familiar. We'd hiked it together when I was a kid. But this time, I was alone, tracing his steps, without the comfort of his steady voice or wide stride. The wind carried the smell of pine and dust. Somewhere nearby, a creek murmured over stones. I walked until the sunlight thinned and the trees thickened. The deeper I went, the more the forest pressed in around me, like it remembered something I didn't. And then I saw the first marker. A stacked stone tower just off the path. Balanced, intentional, waiting. I stopped and stared at the stone tower, trying to decide if it was natural or placed. It stood about waist-high, 5 rocks, balanced with improbable precision, no sign of collapse despite the breeze that whispered through the trees. I stepped closer, noticing something carved into the top stone, a faint line drawing that looked like an eye. Not a perfect circle, not artistic, just a rough symbol gouged deep, like someone was in a hurry. I took a photo and moved on, more alert now. The trail itself was still visible, but narrower, like fewer boots had passed this way over the years. About 20 minutes later, I found another marker. This time it wasn't stones. Someone had tied a small animal's skull to the branch of a pine tree. A rabbit maybe, though the jawbone looked too long. The skull swayed gently in the wind, clicking against the bark. The deeper I went, the more these signs appeared. Scratched symbols on tree trunks, bones arranged in spirals beneath mossy rocks, and occasionally more of those balanced stone towers, always just off the main path. It felt ritualistic, but not decorative. Functional, like each one served a purpose, though I couldn't say what. My skin began to crawl, not out of fear, but instinct. Something ancestral coiled deep in the gut. By the time I reached a shallow ridge that overlooked a bowl-shaped dip in the land, a natural hollow, I'd counted 7 markers. The wind died as I crossed the edge, and suddenly the air felt thick, not heavy like a storm, but dense, muffled. Sound didn't carry here. The birdsong faded. My boots crunched leaves, but it felt like the noise dropped straight to the forest floor. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the hollow, half hidden behind saplings, stood the figure from my grandfather's photo. Tall, white, human-shaped, but not human. From this distance, I couldn't tell if it was carved wood or something else entirely. It didn't move, didn't sway, It just stood facing west, as if it had been waiting for someone to arrive. I didn't speak, didn't move toward it. Oof, I just stared. Because somehow, without ever having been here before, I knew that I had found the hollow. And the hollow had found me. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, frozen at the ridge, staring at the figure across the hollow. My mind raced through explanations. Maybe it was an old carving left by hunters, or a trail marker gone elaborate. But none of them sat right. Its proportions were wrong. Too tall, limbs too long and narrow. And something about its stillness wasn't passive. It was the kind of stillness that watches. Eventually, I forced myself to move. The descent into the hollow was steep, slick with leaves and loose dirt. Every step felt heavier than it should have, like gravity pulled differently here. I stopped halfway down and looked back. The forest above seemed dimmer, farther away, as if I had stepped through some unseen threshold. My ears popped. Then silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that builds pressure in your head, like being underwater. I reached the center of the hollow and set my pack down near a cluster of stones. The figure stood maybe 30 yards away, half concealed behind two slim trees. It still hadn't moved. I edged closer, slowly, boots, crunching lightly on dry earth, but the sound felt dampened. It didn't echo. I called out hello, but my voice sounded thin, like it was swallowed before it reached the trees. From up close, I could see now it wasn't carved at all. Its surface looked organic bark and skin twisted together in a way that made my eyes itch. Its arms were long hands resting at its sides, but the fingers curved slightly like it had just unclenched. The face wasn't fully formed, just indentations where eyes and a mouth might go. Like something had started to mimic a human, but never finished. I backed away, pulse spiking, and set up camp near the ridge. I couldn't bring myself to sleep near it. Still, I had come for a reason. I took out the tobacco from my grandfather's pack, lit a small offering by the stones, and let the smoke rise. The figure didn't react. But that night, as I lay in my tent under a thin veil of stars, I woke to the sound of leaves crunching. And when I looked out, it was gone. I shot up in my sleeping bag, heart already racing. The fire had burned low to glowing embers, casting soft red light across the hollow. My breath came shallow as I scanned the tree line where the figure had stood hours earlier. Empty now, just branches and shadows. I fumbled for my flashlight hand, stiff from cold and fear, and swept the beam across the clearing. Nothing moved, but I could feel it. Something had changed. The silence was deeper, like the forest had sealed itself shut. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint, carried on the still air like smoke. It wasn't English. Soft, rhythmic syllables I didn't recognize, but it stirred something deep in my chest. A low chanting, almost melodic, repeating from somewhere just beyond the reach of my light. It sounded old, purposeful, and somehow familiar, like a memory I'd never made. I crawled halfway out of the tent and held my breath, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound came from the far end of the hollow, near where the figure had been. But there was no movement. No outline, just that voice like wind passing through reeds, saying something not meant for human ears. Then just as suddenly it stopped, snapped off clean. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. The air was thick and unmoving. Then the crunch of leaves. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circled the camp. I gripped the handle of my knife, still crouched, not daring to shine the light again. Something brushed the outside of my tent. Not a paw, not an animal. A hand, fingertips dragging slowly across the nylon wall. I whispered, Who's there, even though I knew I wouldn't get an answer? The tent fabric dimpled near my hip, like someone was kneeling just outside, listening. I held my breath, pulse thudding against my skull, until finally the pressure eased and the footsteps faded into the trees. I stayed awake until the first threads of dawn lit the sky. When I finally stepped outside, the clearing was untouched, but the figure had returned, standing once again at the edge of the hollow facing west, exactly where it had been, exactly how it had been. Except now one arm was raised, pointing directly at me. I didn't move, not at first. I just stared at the outstretched arm, the long, bark-like fingers frozen mid-gesture. It wasn't pointing toward the trail or the ridge. It was pointing deeper into the hollow, into the shadows that thickened between the trees like a tunnel with no end. I felt an overwhelming urge to follow it, like gravity had shifted directions and was pulling me forward. But something inside me, some old instinct passed down in blood, told me if I stepped that way, I wouldn't step back. Instead, I turned toward the trail I'd come down. Only it wasn't there. Where the narrow path should have risen up the ridge, there was now only thicket and stone. The trees looked unfamiliar, taller, denser, older. I walked in the direction I knew the trail had been, boots crunching over frost-tipped leaves. But within minutes, I found myself back at the same clearing. Same stones, same figure, still pointing. I tried again, taking a different angle, using my compass this time. West, just like the journal had said. 20 minutes of steady climbing. Still the trail twisted, impossibly curving back toward the hollow like a hand closing into a fist. My GPS blinked uselessly, flickering between coordinates that didn't make sense sometimes, flashing a location from another state entirely before failing completely. The woods weren't letting me out. Panic set in slowly, like ice in the bloodstream. My hands trembled. My breath quickened. I called out loud just once, but my voice fell flat. No echo, no response. I reached the edge of the clearing again, and this time the figure was gone. But in its place, there were footprints. Just one set. Human-shaped, but stretched somehow, as if the feet had been pulled long like melted wax. They circled the fire pit, once then trailed off into the deeper trees, the same direction the figure had been pointing. I turned back to my tent, heart in my throat, and found something resting on my sleeping bag. A single stone, and carved into it that same eye from the first marker, wide open, watching. I stared at the stone for a long time, too afraid to touch it. The eye etched into the surface seemed fresh, sharp lines, flakes of dust still clinging to the groove. Not old like the other. This one had been left for me. I picked it up finally, almost expecting it to be warm, but it was cold, heavy. I held it in my palm, trying to think clearly, trying to remember anything from my grandfather's journal that might help. Then I did. Buried near the back was a short, almost forgotten entry. One line scrawled in a shaky hand, years after most of the other notes. When in the hollow, if the figure points, offer the smoke and face west. Do not speak. Do not turn back. At the time, I'd brushed it off as rambling. But now, it felt like instructions. A last-ditch guide from someone who had been trapped just like me. I grabbed the rest of the tobacco, my lighter, and walked to the center of the clearing. I knelt, placed the stone with the eye at my feet, and lit the tobacco. Thick, bitter smoke curled upward. I turned west. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't say a word. The wind picked up sudden and sharp. Leaves scattered like birds startled from trees. Somewhere in the woods, a high, low groaning sound rose, not quite a scream, but not natural either. It faded as quickly as it came. Then I felt it, a shift beneath my boots. The ground relaxed, the air lightened, and behind me, the whispering stopped. I opened my eyes. The trail was there again, clear, direct, climbing out of the hollow, like it had never been gone. Story 3. The Silence at Devil's Tooth. I had been chasing summits for years. Granite faces soothed me more than any therapist ever could. The higher I climbed, the quieter my mind became. That is why I set my sights on Devil's Tooth, a jagged ridge tucked deep within the Trinity Alps of Northern California. Remote, technical, off the map in all the ways I liked. It had no official trail to the top, just whispers on climbing forums and a few GPS tracks from people who never returned to post-trip reports. That was the appeal, the mystery, the silence. It was early September when I loaded up my gear and drove north alone. My plan was simple: reach the base by dusk, camp overnight, summit the next morning, film what I could for the climbing vlog I had not updated in months. Not for lack of footage, but because nothing lately had felt worth sharing. Everything was too curated, too easy. Devil's Tooth would be different. It would be real. I parked where the dirt road ended and hiked until even the forest seemed uncertain whether people belonged there. No cell service, no markers. Only the steady incline and the occasional glimpse of the ridge through breaks in the trees. The silence came gradually, like fog rolling in without fanfare. First the birds stopped, then the wind faded. My bootsteps began to echo, though nothing around me should have made that possible. I told myself it was elevation, thinner air, nerves. But something else had taken hold the moment I crossed the last dry creek bed. A pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like the forest itself was listening. I ignored it. Climbers live with fear. We flirt with it. Sometimes we even trust it. But silence that deep does not come without a cost. I made camp near a broken tree line where the slope began to steepen into shale. The light was thinning, filtered through layers of pine and jagged rock. I set up my bivy sack between two boulders, boiled water for instant noodles, and listened to the absence around me. No owls, no rustle of nocturnal life, just the soft hiss of my stove and the rhythmic thump of my heartbeat in my ear. It was the kind of quiet that feels shaped, designed. After eating, I took a short walk to scout the next day's ascent. That is when I saw it. A wooden sign nailed to a splintered stump, tilted just slightly, almost hidden behind a veil of creeping vines. The wood had aged gray, the letters hand-carved and faded. I had to brush away dirt and sap to read it. Voices ahead are not yours. I stood there for a full minute, frowning, half expecting someone to jump out and tell me it was a joke. A forgotten art installation, maybe. But the longer I stared at it, the colder I felt. It was not weathered enough to be ancient, not fresh enough to be a prank. The carving was deep, deliberate. Every letter pressed with pressure, like someone had been in a hurry but could not afford to be sloppy. I took a picture of it, even said something stupid out loud, like I was talking to the vlog. It felt forced. The camera suddenly seemed ridiculous, like a child's toy in a cathedral. I kept the sign in my peripheral vision the whole way back to camp, never letting it fall entirely behind me. And when I zipped into my sack that night, I dreamt not of the summit, but of voices whispering my name in different tones. Some calm, some afraid, one laughing. By morning, the sign was gone, not broken or moved, gone. In its place was a single line of stones shaped like an arrow pointing up the ridge, toward the tooth, toward the silence. And like a fool, I followed. The trail vanished within 30 minutes of breaking camp. What had looked like a loose but navigable slope on satellite maps turned into a maze of fractured granite and wind-swept ledges. I moved carefully, checking footholds, testing hand grips, climbing more by feel than by sight. The arrow made of stone still echoed in my mind, and with every hour that passed, the silence around me grew stranger. Not peaceful, not still, just hollow, like sound itself had been drained from the world. Then I noticed the echoes. Not mine at first. I heard a voice my own calling out, hold on, a phrase I had not said. Not yet. It came from the ledge above me, faint clip thrown back like a delayed broadcast. I froze, listened. Nothing. The wind didn't carry it again. A half hour later, I slipped on a patch of dry lichen and let out a sharp curse. 10 seconds later, I heard it again, far too close. Same tone, same anger, same word. But I had not said anything that time. Something was reflecting my voice back at me, but wrong, out of sync, off by seconds or minutes. Sometimes distorted, sometimes perfectly clear, as if something was learning my voice. Practicing, I told myself it was the acoustics. Narrow gullies and fractured stone can do strange things to sound. But when I heard myself say, keep going, in a tone I hadn't used since childhood, soft, scared, I knew something else was happening. The wind had stopped entirely. The air was dense, pushing on my ears like I was underwater. My own breathing sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I crested a ridge and looked down into a sheer bowl of rock. The stone there was darker, smoothed unnaturally, like something had scoured it clean. In the center stood a narrow pillar of granite, and on top of it, resting impossibly still, was my climbing helmet. But I had not taken it off. I had not lost it. It was waiting for me, perfectly placed, like bait. I stared at the helmet for a long time, trying to remember if there had been a moment I could have dropped it. But I knew I had not. It had been clipped to my pack that morning. I had checked. The strap had been secure. For it to be here now, balanced on that pillar in the center of the basin, meant only one thing. Someone or something wanted me to see it. I descended carefully, boots scraping across slate and loose gravel eyes, flicking to every shadow. I kept expecting to see movement at the edges of my vision, but there was nothing. Just that unbearable quiet pressing in. When I reached the base, I stepped toward the pillar. The air grew colder with every step. My breath came out in short puffs, though the sun still hung high and bright above. The helmet was clean, too clean. No dust, no scratches. The logo sticker was untouched, even though my pack had taken a beating during the climb. I reached for it, hesitated, then grabbed it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. It was mine. I could feel the worn padding, the familiar grooves where my fingers naturally settled. I turned to climb out, then froze. The route behind me was wrong. What had been a gradual slope had become a steep rock wall, sheer, cracked in unfamiliar patterns. I turned again. The whole basin looked different. The ridge where I had entered was gone. In its place was another dark slope, one I did not recognize. I took a step toward it, then stopped. On a flat rock nearby sat my water bottle, upright, half full, condensation still fresh. It had been in my hand 20 minutes ago. I picked it up. Same grip marks, same scratches from years of use. Then I saw the boot prints. My boot prints, leading to the pillar, circling it, and leading away again. A dozen sets. Slightly different. Some deeper, some more faded. I was not on a trail anymore. I was inside something, a loop, a trap. And it had been walking me in circles long before I noticed. I stood there gripping the helmet in one hand and the water bottle in the other, trying to steady my breathing. The loop was too precise to be accidental. Something was guiding me, studying me, maybe even playing with me. I had been trained to assess risk in every environment, but nothing in my experience had prepared me for terrain that rewrote itself. I chose a direction that felt wrong only because it was unfamiliar. Maybe the right kind of wrong would break the pattern. Scrambled up a rock chute that should have led nowhere. Loose shale tumbled beneath my boots, and more than once I had to press flat against the cliff to steady myself. When I finally pulled myself over the edge, lungs burning, I found something I had not seen on any map. The rock face loomed above me, smooth as glass, except for one narrow fissure that split the granite like a wound. From a distance, it had looked like a shadow. Up close, it pulsed. Not literally, not visibly, but in that way, your body knows something is alive before your brain can confirm it. I stepped closer. The fissure ran from the ground up nearly 20 feet thin, but jagged, as if the mountain had been torn open from the inside. Wind did not blow here, but the cold that leaked from the opening had teeth. And then I heard it. A voice. Mine. Whispered at first, then stronger. Echoing from within the rock and from inside that slit in the earth. I backed away, but the sound followed, not carried by air, but by stone itself. The voice grew louder until it wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming, not words, just raw sound. Familiar. Human. Me. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but the noise was inside my skull. It vibrated in my teeth, behind my ribs, like the mountain was hollow and filled with something that had learned to speak through me. Then, as suddenly as it began, the screaming stopped, and I heard breathing behind me. Slow, close, not my own. I turned and saw myself standing there. But it wasn't me. Not anymore. It stood less than 10 feet away upright, still watching. Same build, same clothes, same scratches on the left knee of the pants. But the face, my face was wrong. Too still, too smooth. The eyes reflected no light, like deep pits pretending to be pupils. The expression was blank, but studying me, as if trying to decide whether it had finished copying. I couldn't move. My limbs felt weighted like the mountain itself had latched onto my nerves. The thing took a step forward, perfectly silent. No crunch of gravel beneath its boot, just motion seamless and deliberate. Another step. I managed to stumble back, shaking my head, whispering no under my breath, like that word meant something here. Then it smiled. It was not a human smile. The lips parted too far. The teeth were mine, but spaced wrong, too uniform, too perfect. It blinked once, slow and unnatural, and then tilted its head the way a curious animal might. That was when I turned and ran. I didn't care about the pack. I didn't care about the trail. I ran like something primal had taken over. Down the scree, over broken boulders, through brambles that tore at my jacket. My chest ached, my legs burned. Still I ran. At some point I fell and hit my shoulder hard, but I kept going until I saw the tree line open and the shape of my car at the edge of the dirt road. I never looked back. 3 days later, I watched the footage on my helmet camera. I had no memory of filming the final clip. Just 1 minute of me standing at the edge of the rock face, smiling, saying nothing, just smiling. Story 4. The Last Camp at Green Feather Lake. It started like most reunion trips do, with a flurry of texts, old jokes, and the kind of forced enthusiasm people use to mask growing distance. There were 4 of us. Me, Marcus Dillon, and Jess. College friends scattered by jobs and cities, trying to reclaim the closeness we once had by retreating to nature for a long weekend. Jess found the spot, a little-known lake tucked deep in the Wasatch Mountains called Green Feather. No official campground, no trail markers, just an unmaintained Forest Service road that ended in a clearing surrounded by pine and silence. Perfect, she had said. No crowds, no service, just us. We packed light but brought what mattered: food, firewood, a tent each, and a cheap handheld recorder Dylan had picked up from a ghost hunting subreddit. He insisted we bring it half joking, half serious. Said the lake had a weird history. He sent a link to a forum post claiming people heard children laughing near the water at night. No explanation, just a warning. Don't follow the voices. We laughed it off. The plan was simple. Drive in Friday, hike the last 2 miles on foot, camp, drink, swim, catch up, repeat. And for a while it worked. The hike in was beautiful. The trail was rough but manageable. And when the lake came into view, a shimmering oval surrounded by pines, it felt like we had stepped into a postcard. No trash, no other tents, just still water and that mountain air that makes you forget the world. By sunset, we had a fire going, music playing low from Marcus's old speaker, and a bottle of bourbon already half gone. We toasted to surviving our 20s, to friendship, to the silence. We had no idea how loud the forest could become. That first night, everything felt perfect. The air was cool but not cold, the sky clear enough to see every star above the ridgeline. We sat around the fire telling the same stories we always did, the kind that got funnier with each retelling and each sip. Dylan fiddled with the recorder, holding it close to his mouth like a podcast host narrating nonsense for laughs. Jess rolled her eyes and passed him the marshmallows, but no one told him to stop. It was familiar, comfortable. Around midnight, the fire burned low, and we let the conversation drift into silence. That is when we heard it. Laughter, faint at first, like it had come from far across the lake. High-pitched and light, not manic or eerie, just children's laughter, clear, playful, and possible. We all froze. The fire popped loudly and startled Jess, who grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Marcus stood turning toward the water. His voice was steady but low. That sounded like kids. But there were no other campers. We had not passed a single person on the way in, and it would have taken hours to hike in with children. None of us spoke for a minute. Then Dylan, ever the skeptic, shrugged and said it was probably an echo. A bird, maybe. Night plays tricks on the ears. Jess agreed quickly, too quickly, and pulled her jacket tighter around herself. We let it go, mostly. But when we crawled into our tents, I noticed something strange. My zipper had been pulled halfway down. I knew I had closed it earlier. I always did. Still, I chalked it up to distraction and zipped it back up, double-checking the corners before settling in. I did not sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear movement in the trees. Soft footsteps, maybe. A giggle just beyond the fire ring. I told myself it was wind or animals. Nothing serious, just nerves. In the morning, the forest looked unchanged, but something had shifted. The air felt heavier, like the trees had been listening, and now they were waiting. The next morning started quiet, too quiet. No bird song, no wind moving through the branches, just stillness and the occasional crackle of last night's fire settling into ash. Jess and Dylan were already by the lake, skipping stones and pretending everything was normal. Marcus sat on a log with a mug of instant coffee, staring at the water like it might start talking. I joined him and asked if he'd heard anything last night. He nodded slowly without looking at me. "I thought it was a dream," he said. Then he finally turned, and I saw how pale he was. But I saw someone. In the trees. Just for a second. Watching. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat within the silence between us, saying more than either of us could. Later that afternoon, I walked to the far edge of the lake alone, following the shoreline through a patch of mossy stones. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a log, but as I got closer, I realized it was a face. A pale, bloated face pressed just beneath the surface of the water. Long black hair floated like ink around her. Her eyes were open, eyes wide, staring up through the surface. Her lips were slightly parted, and her arms trailed behind her, as if reaching for something below. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the rocks, and when I looked again, she was gone. I called out. Nothing answered. No ripples, no movement. Just clear, glassy water. I sprinted back to camp, breath ragged, trying to explain what I saw. Jess looked scared. Dylan just shook his head. You're overtired, man. Lakes do weird things with shadows. But Marcus didn't say a word. He just got up, walked to his tent, and zipped it shut. That night, none of us spoke much. The fire was smaller, the bourbon untouched. We all stayed close, but it didn't feel like we were together anymore. It felt like something had settled between us. Something cold. Something that didn't want to leave. That night, the silence felt sharper. The trees around our campsite no longer seemed like a backdrop, they felt like walls. We built the fire high, more for comfort than warmth, and no one strayed more than a few feet from its light. Dylan tried to lighten the mood by playing back a few recordings from his handheld device, the ones he had made the first night. Mostly static, some garbled voices, bits of our own conversation. Then we heard it. A soft laugh, faint but unmistakable, threaded between the clips. None of us had made that sound. We all turned to Dylan, who rewound the file and played it again. This time we listened in silence. After the laugh came a voice, thin, almost a whisper, saying one word in a sing-song tone. Dylan. We all looked at him. He shook his head, too stunned to speak. No one argued when Jess said she was going to her tent early. Marcus followed a few minutes later. I sat by the dying fire, poking at the embers, trying to pretend everything could still make sense. I crawled into my tent around midnight. I double-zipped the door, tightened every flap, and kept the flashlight gripped in one hand like a weapon. I lay still, straining to hear anything over my own breath. Then the whispering started. It wasn't inside my tent. It was outside, moving. A voice brushing against the nylon, first at the back, then near the zipper. It spoke low, like it was trying not to wake someone. At first, I couldn't understand the words, but then I caught one. My name, spoken in my own voice, repeated once, twice, calm, familiar. And I heard movement, soft footsteps. A zipper sliding, a tent opening, then silence. I called out, no answer. I unzipped my tent and stepped into the cold. Marcus's tent was open, empty. His boots were still outside. And the recorder sat by the fire, still running. The only sound it captured after that was the wind. But we all knew what we had heard. By morning, Marcus was still gone. We searched the shoreline, calling his name, pacing the perimeter of the camp, like we could undo what had happened just by walking it backwards. Jess kept wiping her hands on her jeans over and over, like she could scrub the fear off her skin. Dylan stayed quiet, holding the recorder tight, like it was the only thing grounding him to reality. We found no footprints, no broken branches, no trail. Marcus had simply stepped out of his tent and vanished. We packed up the camp in tense silence. No one said it, but we all felt it. Leaving wasn't going to be as simple as hiking back the way we came. Jess turned to me, voice shaking, and said, we needed to do something. Anything. She remembered reading once about reversal rituals and folklore. Things people did when the woods tried to trap them. Dylan scoffed, but not like he used to. not with confidence. Just the hollow resistance of someone who needed logic to survive. She told us to sit in a circle around the dead fire, hold hands, and play the recording backward. Said we needed to return the voices, to give them back whatever they were taking from us. It sounded ridiculous, but we did it. Dylan rewound the last clip until the static thinned and then hit play in reverse. What came out wasn't gibberish. It was chanting, low, harmonic, like a voice stretched over centuries trying to speak through broken speakers. The wind picked up suddenly, pushing against the trees in every direction. Jess began to murmur words I didn't recognize, as if something had crawled into her throat and was using her voice. Then she went stiff. Eyes rolled back, lips moving but no sound coming out. I reached for her. Dylan yelled. She collapsed to the ground. When she came to, she didn't remember anything. But that night, she spoke in her sleep. Not in English, not in any language we recognized. Her voice sounded distant, thin, like it was coming from under the lake. And when we played back the recording later, there was a new voice layered beneath hers. Marcus, crying, begging us to leave. At sunrise, Jess was gone too. No scream, no rustling of the tent, just her empty sleeping bag and a cold imprint where she had been. Dylan and I didn't speak. We just stared at the empty space like it could still give her back. Her boots were untouched, and the handheld recorder sat where she had left it, now completely dead, despite fresh batteries the night before. We didn't bother looking for her. We knew it wouldn't matter. We left the lake in silence. The trail twisted strangely, no longer matching the route we'd used to hike in. Trees shifted places. Landmarks disappeared. And yet, somehow we made it back to the car by midday. Neither of us dared speak until we hit pavement, like the forest might still be listening. Dylan moved to Arizona 2 weeks later and never returned my calls. I heard through a mutual friend that he threw the recorder into a fire pit and deleted every photo from the trip. I don't blame him. I kept one thing, Jess's journal. I found it tucked under a rock near her tent. Most of it was normal, but the last page was different. Just a single line written over and over in shaky handwriting. Do not follow the laughing. Do not follow the laughing. Do not follow the laughing. I sleep with a light on now. Sometimes when the wind hits my apartment just right, I hear something faint. Like laughter through pine needles, like children playing in a place they shouldn't be. And when I dream of the lake. But in the dream, the lake is empty, and I'm the one calling them in. Story ver 5, Fog Road. I was driving back from my cousin's wedding in Vermont, running on bad coffee and even worse GPS. It was just past midnight when the fog rolled in. Not a gentle mist, but thick, low-hanging curtains of white that swallowed the road whole. My headlights barely pushed more than 10 feet ahead, and every tree along the shoulder loomed like a figure waiting to step into view. My phone had no signal, no map, and the blue dot on the screen spun in place like it was lost too. I had been on Route 6, a road I knew well. Somewhere past the old covered bridge, I missed a turn. The pavement narrowed. The yellow lines disappeared. I should have turned around. But there was no shoulder, no obvious place to stop. Just endless trees, silence, and the low hum of tires on damp asphalt. I kept going. Then the road changed. The surface beneath me was no longer smooth. The asphalt cracked and dipped, patched in places with dirt and gravel. Branches reached lower, clawing toward the windshield, and the fog grew thicker still. I turned the radio on just to feel less alone, but all I got was static. Then a voice too soft to make out flickered through the static and disappeared. I leaned forward, eyes straining through the white blur, and caught sight of something on the side of the road. A sign. Hand-painted, crooked, old. It read simply, Fog Road, no exit after dusk. I slowed the car, blinked, looked again. The sign was gone. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but fog behind me. And somewhere in the static, the voice whispered again. This time, it sounded like my name. I pressed on the brake hard, hammering the voice still curling around the static like smoke. I shook my head, told myself I was tired, maybe even dozing off behind the wheel. I turned the radio off and drove on, slowly hugging the right side of the road. But the fog was relentless. It pressed against the windows like breath swirling in slow, unnatural patterns, and made it hard to tell whether I was even moving at all. Then I saw lights up ahead. Faint, warm glows like gas lanterns flickering behind glass. The road widened slightly enough to suggest a town square or an intersection, and I rolled forward until shapes began to emerge through the fog buildings. Wooden storefronts, slanted roofs, a post office with its signs swinging gently despite the still air. There was no sound, no cars, no footsteps, not even wind. But everything looked perfectly maintained. No dust, no broken windows, no sign of abandonment. Just emptiness. As if everyone had left seconds before I arrived. I pulled over in front of what looked like a general store. Its windows were dark, but a single light glowed from the back room. I stepped out of the car, leaving the engine running, and walked up to the door. The bell above it jingled when I opened it, and for a moment I thought someone would call out a greeting. No one did. Shelves lined the walls stocked with goods that looked modern, but slightly off labels and fonts. I didn't recognize brands that didn't exist. A bag of chips had a date stamp from 1983. A bottle of cola had no barcode. I picked it up and it felt warm, as if it had just been placed there. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate. I froze bottle still in my hand and listened. They crossed the floor overhead, paused, then took one heavy step down the staircase. I turned back toward the door. It was closed. I hadn't touched it. And through the window, my car headlights had vanished into the fog. I wasn't alone. And I wasn't sure I had ever been. I yanked the door open with more force than I meant to, stumbling back onto the porch. The cold air hit me like a wall, but I barely noticed I just needed to be outside again, where there was space, where I could breathe. I turned to where my car had been idling moments before, but the fog had eaten it whole. No shape, no lights, just thick gray silence. Then I saw a dim glow flicker to my left, just beyond the edge of the square. A sign buzzed faintly through the mist service station. A narrow structure with a single old-fashioned pump and a cracked window glowing with dull orange light. I walked toward it, trying not to run. My footsteps echoed too loudly on the wet pavement, like the road wanted to announce me. Inside the station, a man stood behind the counter. At least he looked like a man. He wore a grease-stained cap and coveralls. His skin was pale, not the kind of pale you get from staying indoors too long, but the kind that made you wonder if blood still moved beneath it. His smile came a second too late, like someone had reminded him that smiling was part of being human. "Fill you up?" he asked, though I hadn't said a word. My car, it was right there. I pointed behind me. "I don't see it anymore." He nodded slowly. "That happens sometimes on Fog Road. Easy to lose what you came in with." I stared at him. Where exactly am I?" He gestured toward the counter where a faded map sat under cracked glass. But the names were wrong. Nothing I recognized. Places called Ash Hollow and Needles Bend and Return Mile. "Is there a way out?" I asked. His eyes flicked toward the fogged-up window. "Not after dusk." he said, repeating the cyanide scene. You can wait till morning, if it comes. I backed toward the door. He didn't stop me. But just before I stepped outside, he said one more thing low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. Don't answer if they knock. They sound friendly, but they're not. Then he smiled again. Too white, too late. I left the gas station without looking back. The fog pressed against me like a wet sheet, every sound muffled, every step hesitant. I just needed to find the car or a road sign or something familiar. But no matter which direction I walked, the town stayed the same. Same buildings, same intersection, same flickering lantern above the general store. I walked past it once then, again and again. Always from a different angle, but it was the same corner. I even scratched a mark into one of the porch posts with my keys. 10 minutes later, I passed it again. The same mark. Still fresh. I called out. Just my voice bouncing back. No birds, no wind, nothing alive. Then I saw someone standing at the far end of the street. A woman. Pale barefoot, wearing an old white dress that clung to her like fog-soaked paper. She didn't move. Just stood there, arms at her sides, head tilted slightly like she was listening. I called to her. She didn't answer. I took a step closer. She mirrored me one step forward. I froze. Took a step back. She did the same. I turned and ran. Back past the general store. Past the diner. Past the same broken street lamp. Every building exactly as it was before, like I was sprinting on a treadmill inside a dream. Then I heard something new. Footsteps behind me. Not matching mine, slower, deliberate, getting closer. I ducked into the alley between two buildings and pressed my back to the cold wood, heart racing. The footsteps passed the entrance, then stopped. I held my breath. Seconds stretched into minutes. I peeked out. No one there. But when I turned back toward the alley, it had changed. It was no longer a dead end. It opened to a narrow footpath leading behind the town and into the trees. Lanterns lit the path every few feet, swaying gently, though the air was still. Something wanted me to follow. And in that moment, I didn't know what scared me more, staying in the loop forever, or finding out what waited at the end of the path. I followed the lantern-lit path because I had no choice. The town was folding in on itself, and whatever force controlled it wanted me to keep moving. The deeper I walked into the woods, the quieter everything became. No insects, no breeze. Just the faint creak of lanterns swinging above me, as if they too were holding their breath. The fog thinned slightly under the trees, revealing a clearing ahead. In the center was a stone circle, wide and perfectly shaped, like something carved long before roads were laid or maps were drawn. Inside the circle stood three figures. They wore cloaks that shimmered like wet bark. Their faces were obscured by hoods, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. One of them extended a hand toward a small pedestal in the center of the circle. On it lay an object I recognized instantly, my car keys, but they looked wrong. Aged, rusted, twisted slightly like they'd been soaking in water for years. The figure spoke without moving its mouth. Night has come. Choose. I stepped forward, unsure whether it was my body or something else guiding it. The air inside the circle felt thick, buzzing faintly like static between radio stations. I reached for the keys, but another figure raised its hand. Give something first, it said. What? I asked, voice shaking. A name. Yours or another's? I stared at them, my mind scrambling. Was this how Marcus and the others disappeared? Had they chosen? Had they offered someone else? Behind me, I heard laughter. Children's laughter echoing between the trees. I whispered my own name. The ground shook faintly. The lanterns flickered and died. The cloaked figure stepped back into the woods, vanishing like smoke. I grabbed the keys. They were cold, heavy, but real. As I turned to run, the fog surged forward again, swallowing the circle, the trees, the path behind me. And somewhere beyond the trees, I heard a voice that sounded like mine, whispering from behind a tree. "You should have given someone else." I ran through the fog, gripping the keys so tightly they cut into my palm. The trees bent in unnatural ways as I passed, and the ground felt less like earth and more like something breathing beneath my feet. The road appeared again, no warning, just asphalt rising from the forest floor like a memory resurfaced. My car sat in the middle of it, headlights on, engine running. I didn't question it. I threw the door open and slid into the seat, jamming the key into the ignition, even though the engine was already on. I drove. No GPS, no phone signal, no idea which direction led out. I just followed the road as it wound and twisted through the white, refusing to stop, refusing to blink. At some point, the fog began to thin. Trees gave way to open fields. The road widened. A mile marker passed that actually made sense. And just like that, I was out. I pulled into a gas station that didn't vanish. People moved, spoke, looked at me like I existed. I was back. I had escaped. But something wasn't right. The man at the counter flinched when I spoke. My reflection in the gas station window didn't blink in time with me. When I opened my phone, every contact was gone except one. It said only Fog Road. And late at night, I still hear the laughter in the static if I tune the radio just right. I made it out. But I'm not sure the part that returned was the part that left. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.